Hi, everybody. This is Dawn Mitchell, and welcome to Dawn of Sports. Today, we have a friend of the program coming back, Ivan Maisel. He has written a numerous amount of books. Remember, we had him on talking about the Maisel Report. He also wrote A War in Dixie. I keep trying to catch his eye, The Skull Report. I mean, just so many books. But we're talking about his latest one to come out in September, American Coach, The Triumph and Tragedy of Notre Dame legend Frank Leahy. So I can't wait to dive into this with Ivan. That's coming up.
Great to do this show with my old friend Ivan. We worked at the Dallas Morning News together many years ago. Great to have him on with Dawn. This is Dawn of Sports. We're coming from the Aquarius Home Services Studios. Best way to listen to this show or any show with the network is to subscribe to your favorite podcast app. We do appreciate it. Show is also presented to you by Lexus, Wayzata, and Maplewood. Again, Ivan's one of the great college football writers, one of the great sports writers of his generation. If he writes it, it's worth reading. And I already know that this one might surprise you. I think there's some subplots to this story that even Notre Dame fans might be surprised by. Back to you, Dawn.
Well, Jim, you brought up exactly what I was going to ask Ivan for my first question. Ivan, I first of all love college football. I went to Boston College, of course, Leahy, Boston College, and then Notre Dame. But in the title, The Triumph and Tragedy, I was like, whoa, what's the tragedy? I love how you not only can go into this legend that coached in college, but you get into his personal life. Is that what attracted you to writing this book? What was the hook for you?
Well, first of all, Dawn and Jim, thanks for having me. His personal life and the multi-layered, as we all are as humans, part of his life I didn't know about. What attracted me originally was merely the fact that when he retired 72 years ago, he had the second best winning percentage in the history of college football to Newt Rockne, who he played for at Notre Dame. And he still has the second best winning percentage, and he was completely forgotten. So then I looked and realized that found out that with the second best record, it took him 13 years to be elected to the College Football Hall of Fame. And that was the thread I started pulling on. Well, and it turned out that the other football coaches didn't like him, and they didn't like him because he beat the hell out of them. He was unrelenting in his pursuit of winning football games to the detriment of everything else in his life, up to and including his family. His son Fred, who I count as a friend, we had an email friendship for a very long time. And Fred once said to another writer that, Dad belonged to the world and Mom had 8 kids. And, that's kind of what that defined Frank Leahy's view pretty well. He was first after going after college football games, and then everything else in his life came after that.
You mentioned that the coaches didn't like him because, yes, first of all, they beat him up in terms of football, but he spoke in big words. And sometimes they felt like he was being putting people down, but that I don't know of his personality per se. Is that just how he spoke? Is that just his persona? Is that just something that irritated people as well? Or how was that used?
Well, Don Leahy was an introvert. He came from the South Dakota prairie, and he had a father who was pretty much self-educated. And the bet in their little town in South Dakota, Winter, South Dakota, was that his father, there was not a word in Webster's dictionary that his father couldn't define. So Leahy was taught the importance of a vocabulary, and he used a lot of words that people don't normally use. And because he spoke so formally and with such a full vocabulary, he sounded a little snobby. you're speaking, you're too good for us the way you speak. And it was just, in a business where you have a public persona, even the sports writers, and you've hung around, Jim, how big our vocabulary is. Even even the sports writers thought he was talking down to them a little bit, and he was befuddled by that. He just was using words the way he was taught to use them, and he never really understood why that put people off.
Yeah, why would anybody using big words in extemporaneous conversation be off-putting?
Well, there's the one adjective I kept coming back to describe him was unctuous, and then I thought, well, maybe that's not what people may not know what that is either. So
I will say this: we've both been doing this a long time, and one of the tenets of sports writing, if not all newspaper writing, was write for a third grade audience, because not everybody's gonna. I think it's okay to encourage people to look up a damn word once in a while.
I agree. I always agree, and I kind of aimed. I did dumb a few of them. I did try to dumb some of it down, but I thought if this is the perfect word to describe this, then it's the perfect word. And,
exactly.
Yeah. So, and Leahy was, and oddly enough, for all of his rich vocabulary, and he had a big sounding voice in a spoken a formal sort of way. He barely skated through Notre Dame. He was a C student, and that probably speaks more to his interest in football than it does in his lack of interest in academics. Even as a player at Notre Dame for Rockne, he was all about football, and it was a good thing that he was intellectually interested in the game, because he really wasn't big enough to play there, and through his intellect and desire, he won a starting job, but he wasn't physically able to hold on to it. I think in his career at Notre Dame, I don't know that he started 5 games.
Wow. By the way, I just want to offer full disclosure. This is the second time we've recorded a show with Ivan. The first one, the files were corrupted. And it was a beautiful sounding episode, and Ivan was great. And if you hear background noise during this episode, it's because we're catching Ivan on his tour. We're catching him at the Minneapolis airport, believe it or not. And so he can't control crying babies and crowd noise and all that stuff. But the content is worth sticking around for. So I just wanted to say that. Back to Dawn.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of Leahy's 8 children crying in the background, or he had more. It was like perfectly timed, the baby cry, by the way. Frank, he was not able to say Google it to people because Google didn't exist back then. But when you talk about all of his football intelligence as well, the football IQ, which is off the charts, he brought the Fighting Irish just back to and probably kept it in the forefront of America's mind as this football bastion. And for a small, relatively, in terms of like the Ohio States and whatever, but for a small academic institution, how important was that collision of football greatness, a small Catholic college, and it becoming what it is? What was his role in that, Ivan?
That's a great point, Dawn. And again, another thing that attracted me to writing his story is that I think you can make a very good case that until Leahy came along, Rockne's success at Notre Dame could be attributed to Rockne as much as it could be to Notre Dame. And there are plenty of schools where there has been one coach who has had a great run, but the school did not sustain it. I think the Gophers, people can look at Bernie Bierman in the 30s when they were winning national championships. And I think people, if you know Gopher football, that's Bierman, and the sport, the school didn't sustain that level of success.
Right.
I think what Leahy did especially after World War II, when from 1946 to 49, Notre Dame did not lose a football game, 4 seasons, brought
Incredible.
that success back under Notre Dame's banner. Notre Dame became a place synonymous with success in college football in a way that only several schools approach, and historically no other school can match in terms of the length of Notre Dame's dominance over the sport.
It's just incredible if you think about it, because sometimes it was a couple of years ago, and I was teasing Harrison Smith of the Vikings in the locker room because he and Kyle Rudolph, of course, famous Notre Dame alums that were with the Vikings. And, I would joke around, all right, I'm going to Boston College. And it really wasn't the rivalry on the field as it was. But people don't think now of Notre Dame having down years. And we all know that they have, even in the most recent past. But I would say that Frank has solidified it to be this juggernaut in like people's minds, iconically, that like you have to go and check, they're doing okay this year. But, and most recently they've been coming on strong again. What is it about the lore, the mystique that can carry it through maybe not a great season, that he had an effect on that? I don't know. Was he the coach under where they all decided to jump up and hit the sign before they go out, a la Rudy style? Did he come up with all of that? I just love seeing how iconic figures fit into a lore of a program.
I don't think the sign was there when he was the coach. It may have been. What he instilled at Notre Dame was simply excellence, and he demanded full devotion to the sport in an era when you could get away with that. Now, Notre Dame had academic standards then. You had to maintain a 77 grade point average, whereas the rest of the student body could get by with 70. But there were no limits on practicing then, and the players and coaches used to say that spring training lasted from March until June, and that wasn't all that far off from the truth. Leahy,
wow.
They practiced constantly. We all remember, and they don't really do this anymore in colleges. I mean, they have 2-a-days, but they are prescribed from doing a lot of scrimmaging. Notre Dame under Leahy used to have 3-a-days in August.
Wow.
3-a-days.
Yeah, and they would start out with 3-a-days, and keep in mind that the season didn't start until the first weekend in October, back then. So, and his zeal that he imparted to his players, especially after the war when they had so much talent coming in, because they had players up to in their mid-20s who had served in the service, and he'd have a 55-man team for an 11-man game, because it was players played both offense and defense, and they would have scrimmages on Thursday between the second team and the third team to determine who got on the travel squad for Saturday. And the players would all say that those games were harder and more physical, and they suffered more injuries in the Thursday scrimmages to get on the roster than they did in the games on Saturday themselves.
Wow.
All
So
right,
that's the level of excellence we're talking about.
Wow. Let's get back to Ivan. I want to ask more about the book. I also want to ask about college football as it is currently iterated. But first, we want to take care of the business of the business. We want to remind you we're coming to you from the Aquarius Home Services Studio. We'd also like to thank Minnesota Masonic Charities. Thanks also to our presenting sponsor, Lexus, Wayzata, and Maplewood. Just to veer from the book for a moment, because I know you're such a college football expert, PJ Fleck has been, for much of his tenure, he tried to downplay expectations, even though he was, he would kind of, one sentence he'd say, hey, we want to be great. The next sentence he'd say, but, let's be reasonable. It's very interesting with the new college football playoff. He's now willing to say, hey, that should be our goal. We should be getting into the college football playoff. That should be attainable for us. What do you think about the new system, and is it encouraging to non-traditional programs?
Sure, just because I think the level of success, the definition of success is changing. Just as in March, if you make the tournament and get in, that's a benchmark. I think if you can get into the college football tournament, if you're one of 12, that's a pretty good season, especially for the traditional mid-level, middle of the pack Big Ten teams or the mid majors, the Group of Five conferences. The fruit is hanging a little lower now than it did when there were 4 teams, and especially when there were 2.
Ivan, I wanted to ask you this because obviously a lot of the old school, like Ivan, coaches that wouldn't fly in today's day and age with, so many even of the NFL coaches just saying players are different nowadays. So it's kind of a 2-part question. Do you think a coach with that same mindset like Frank would fly at all in 2025? And can you name maybe a modern day head coach that kind of embodies a little bit of Frank, like still kind of to this day?
That's an interesting question, Dawn. I think the greatest coaches, and I know it for a fact in college football, and I assume it is in other sports, knew how to adjust. Leahy was among them, but I'm thinking of Bear Bryant. Not only integrating Alabama when he did, but switching to the wishbone to take advantage of that speed.
Right.
They look at how the sport is going and they change. Nick Saban did it. Frank Leahy did it. Notre Dame used what was called the Rockne offense, the Notre Dame box. And after Rockne died in March of 1931 in the plane crash, the 2 succeeding coaches used the Notre Dame box offense because they were scared to change from what Rockne did. Leahy came in and he changed to this newfangled T formation. And he did it because he knew it was a better system. Now, he was smart enough to know he had to be careful in how he did it, and he brought everybody along with him as he fomented the change. He took the president of the university to see a Chicago Bears game because the Bears used the T formation, and it was an exciting game, and they were driving back to South Bend, and he said, I'm thinking of changing back to that offense. And the president said, of course you should. I season with it, Leahy won his first of 4 national championships.
Wow, that's incredible. And you talk about how he just focused, Frank did, on football, much to the detriment of everything else, his family, his marriage. But you also mentioned his health. How did that hurt his health? How did being so obsessed with the game of football and coaching hurt his health?
Well, he didn't eat. He would eat like tomato soup and crackers for dinner. I mean, he had a beautiful home near Michigan City, 30 minutes from campus, and he slept during the season in a cot in the campus firehouse. Slept on a cot in a little room in the campus firehouse. He probably slept from midnight to 5 a.m. is what people remember. And he just constantly pushed himself, and really to the point of breaking. He developed stress-induced illnesses. One of them, he had pancreatitis, which was exacerbated by stress, and he had an attack in 1953, his last season, during the game against Georgia Tech, and they all thought he was having a heart attack, and they called in one of the priests from the stands at halftime, and he gave Leahy last rites in the locker room.
Stop! No way.
Yeah. So he pushed himself to the point of exhaustion, and he thought he had to do it to win games because that's what people expected and that's what he demanded. And he was trying to live up to the Notre Dame demand of success as he saw it, and to his own demand for success. And in the end, he couldn't sustain that level. And at age 45, he was wrung out, and he stopped coaching when he was 45 and never went back to it.
Oh, that's so young.
Yeah, I mean, we think of it as young, and I have photos in the book. You can see him when he gets to Notre Dame, and he's a strapping, 32-year-old former offensive lineman, and 13 years later, he's gray-headed. His face is sagging. He's got bags under his eyes, and that was the stress of Notre Dame and the stress of Frank Leahy.
It's like they say whenever you see a president take office, and then by the end of 4 years, how totally different they look. That's kind of, the stress of doing something like that and what he did. Now, albeit restoring it back to its dominance, doing some amazing things. Was it worth it in the long run? So you said you became friends with his son after, being, corresponding through letters and emails and texts and stuff like that. What does the family say? I mean, of course they love him, but what do they say about that tragic part?
Well, he had of the 8 children, 4 are still living, and I interviewed 2 of them, and they are, they're in their 70s and 80s, and they see him for who he was. I mean, they loved him as a father, but they understood what he put himself through, and why he did it, and his not only did he collapse in his way under the strain, but his wife collapsed in her way. She suffered from alcoholism because that's how she could cope with being the mother of 8 kids with a father who was never there. And she eventually recovered, and she lived, she was sober the last 15, 20 years of her life. But the kids see these now elderly children, see them for who they were. And they were charming about their dad. I mean, they tell stories, and it was clear that they didn't have any compunction about bursting his balloon. Fred Leahy, the son that I correspond with, said that, and his dad died when Fred was 23, and he said he got 3 compliments from his dad during his lifetime. And
are you 3?
3.
Wow.
One was for grades, one was for getting a job, and one was for surprising the family by bringing home a Christmas tree he had cut down himself.
Wow.
20 minutes after he walked in with the Christmas tree, the doorbell rang, and it was the neighbor whose yard Fred had cut the tree out
of. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. But they have granted whatever forgiveness that any child grants their parents as they grow older and become adults. They understood who he was and why he did what he did.
So what affected you the most in writing this book in terms of getting to know Frank Leahy as a person?
Just to see the full picture of the man, and honestly, I got a much fuller picture of Notre Dame. And I understood,
Really?
Notre Dame is seen as this college football monolith, that's been forever dominant. That's that's what they take on as their MO. But from the Notre Dame viewpoint, they were a small Catholic university trying to gain a foothold in America at a time when Catholics weren't always treated well.
Mm-hmm.
And football was a vehicle that Notre Dame used to gain purchase as a university that American Catholics latched onto as a way to prove that they were the equal, just as good as anybody else. And Leahy was in the middle of that and a big part of that. And the fact that he, as a football coach, was put on the cover of Time magazine in the late 40s at a time when, the essayist Lance Morrow, who wrote for years for Time and the Wall Street Journal, said that he called the cover of Time, it was at that time an American beatification. I think the week after Frank Leahy was on the cover of Time, Eugene O'Neill was.
Wow.
They were within the same month, and
wow.
Just that sort of stamp of approval and of achievement that Leahy and football brought to Notre Dame and to American Catholics, I don't think I really understood that.
Wow.
I have one more very broad question for you before we get to that. What's the best way for people to get a hold of the book?
Well, the release date is September 16th, Tuesday, September 16th. Books release on Tuesday for some reason. It is already available for pre-order on Amazon, on Bookshop, the Bookshop website, independent bookstores, anywhere you can order a book, you can order American Coach.
Wow. Beautiful. People will find it, and they should find it. My broad-based question to wrap up this conversation, unless there's something else about the book you want. Let me ask you first: is there anything else about the book you want us to know before we move on?
The only thing I would say, Jim, is that one way I looked at Notre Dame football in the post-war era was, this was a time when the NFL was barely anything and the NBA was just starting. And American team sports were Major League Baseball and college football. And in that era, the two beacons of success, of dominance, were the New York Yankees and Notre Dame football. And I found one time when they intersected, which was in the 1952 season. At the end, the Notre Dame opened the season at Penn. Penn had this was before the Ivy League sort of turned inward, and they were still playing national schedules. And the Yankees were clinching the pennant against the Philadelphia A's the night before the game. And Leahy went to the game and went in the locker room. And Mickey Mantle was then a second-year all-star outfielder, and he had been recruited by Oklahoma to play football. And Notre Dame was scheduled to play Oklahoma later that year in a showdown. And Mantle was talking to Red Smith, the famous sports columnist, about how he sees Leahy, and Mantle says, Notre Dame doesn't stand a chance. Oklahoma's going to kill him. And Red Smith said, well, why don't you go tell him? And Mantle said, I think I will. And he got up and he marched over to Leahy, and Leahy smiled at him. And, Mantle's like a 21, 22-year-old kid. He just melted. He said, hi, Coach. Hi, Mr. Leahy. I'm Mickey Mantle. And, what do you think of Oklahoma? And Leahy, very formally, as the way he spoke, said, well, Mickey, I fear that Oklahoma is going to be too much for the Fighting Irish, but we're going to give them everything we've got, and Mantle was just putty in his hands, and they had a great, it was just a great intersection of American sports in that moment, as relayed by the greatest writer of that generation. And that anecdote I just loved.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
And I'll repeat the thing I said last time we talked about this, which is it prompts my memory of Patrick Royce telling the story, walking into a World Series game, realizing he's sitting between Red Smith and Jim Murray and going, look at this. 3 of the greatest American sports writers who ever lived.
Oh, Patrick.
Let's wrap up the show.
Like
really big picture question. I'm fascinated by this topic, and you're the perfect person to ask about it. Why do Americans love football so much, including college football?
Oh, why do Americans love football? The best way for me to answer that, Jim, is 20 years ago. It's one of my favorite stories I ever did. I wrote it for the Stanford Alumni magazine. The editor called me and said, we have the smartest people in the country teaching here. Come out here and ask them why it's important that Stanford beat Cal. And I go out there and I talk to the religious studies dean. I talk to anthropologists. I talk to a professor that studied bonobos in Kenya. I talked to the football coach. And what it came down to is that as a species, we are hardwired for us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
And football, so you start out with that, and then you add the militaristic part of football, which is you're fighting over land, you're fighting over property, and then just the physical the physical demands of the game. You mix all that together, then you add the fact that it's perfect for television. Before television came along, baseball was the national pastime.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you mix all that together, and I'm not sure I could give you a good answer to why it's singularly American. The rest of the world's favorite sport is a different football, but and I don't know why American, you can get into Americans and militaristic stuff, and I don't know whether that's true or not, but I think all those things together, are the reasons that we love football.
Well, and the exuberance, right? When you talk about soccer or football, the other side of the world, you see the crowds and you get into it. With college football, you get that from the universities. And I have friends, like I think I mentioned before, over in Finland, where they ask me, we don't get why colleges and sports are so intertwined. And then, so you get that exuberance of the college kids totally into it, us versus them. You put that on television, it kind of becomes ingrained, and just like the purist, I know college football, you can debate it on, with money now coming down, but there's something about the college game and a lot of sports that just has that exuberance, that energy. And I just think sometimes that's contagious and people just love it. And then,
absolutely. I mean, the pageantry of college football is unparalleled, but I think an important part of that too, Dawn, is that you go to college when your brain is its most impressionable, as an adult. And the friends you make at college age are, in most cases, or certainly a lot of cases, are your friends for life in a way that other friends aren't.
Exactly.
And we all have college friends that we still, you might not see for 10 years, and you see them and you pick up the conversation where you left off.
Yes.
So that time in your life, your first time as an adult, your first time as an independent, living independently, all contributes to why we feel the way we do about our colleges and about the sports that our colleges play.
American coach, the triumph and tragedy of Notre Dame legend Frank Leahy, Ivan Maisel. We hope to have Ivan on during the college football season, just to talk more about football, but we'll continue. We'll continue to to find new anecdotes out of this book. I'm about to read it myself. Really excited for that. I don't read a lot of sports books, but this one I will definitely make time for. So Ivan, thanks for taking time out during your travels. We appreciate it as always. Best of luck, and we will talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.